Welcome to more World of Warplanes content from the Noble Q, and in this video I'll be looking at the Tier 8 American premium fighter, the Curtiss XF15C. Hello there, and here on the tarmac outside my hangar is the Curtiss XF15C, and as many of you know, the X denotes an experimental aircraft. 3 prototypes are built, one of which survives to this day as a gate guardian or similar at Quonset Air Museum in Kingstown, Rhode Island, I believe. And this aircraft came at the end of the piston age. It was intended for the Navy. Nobody was really sure if pure jet aircraft at the time would be able to operate from carriers successfully, and therefore experiments were carried out with mixed propulsion aircraft. This aircraft has a conventional piston engine here. I just turn it so you can see the outlet there, probably about that angle there. There is a turbojet here. Of course, it turned out that pure jet aircraft could operate from carriers, and therefore the need for this type of aircraft disappeared. In the game, this aircraft came as one of 2 reward aircraft, the other being the more familiar Dornier 335A1- file, or -1 file. And that event ran between, if I remember correctly, March and April of 2018. It's a fighter. Tends to operate best in heavy fighter spaces rather than pure fighter spaces. It's not particularly manoeuvrable. It's quite quick. It's got what I regard as tricky 20mm cannons, at least they're tricky for me. And what we're going to do is look at the statistics of this aircraft in a spreadsheet. If you don't want to look at a spreadsheet, then use a link below the video to skip ahead to another part of it. Here we have the spreadsheet showing all of the Tier 8 fighters. There are a lot of them. As I scroll across, I count off 16. Now, if you don't know how this spreadsheet works, use the link in the description below to find an instructional video which will tell you most of what you need to know. Let's take a look at the guns on the XF15C, and what you've got is 4 20mm cannons, and straight away I'm going to say I have trouble with these guns. I have trouble with all the American 20mm. For some reason I never give enough lead, and yet the aircraft will sparkle, the aircraft that I'm shooting at, making me think that I'm hitting it when in fact I'm not. Quite surprising really, because there's 1457 feet shell velocity here, which is pretty good for cannons. The rating is 27, cumulative DPS is 460, this is average. You can see that there's green appearing here on the JL1A37, the Chinese jet fighter, 580 DPS there, the best in class. P-80A is only slightly behind it, even with those machine guns, 516. And because of their long-range capabilities, aircraft like the Horton and the TA-152, in theory, outperform the XF-15C. There's also good DPS on the Key 94-2 as well, which is a turn fighter. Nasty combination, that good turn fighter with high DPS. And we've got 115 DPS per cannon, 420 rate of fire. Ranges are relatively healthy, 2493 feet. Quite a good auto-aim angle, 2.5 degrees. You can be off target by 2.5 degrees and the game will correct your aim for you. Dispersion angle is pretty standard for Tier 8 fighters, 0.55. That's the way the bullets spread out as they leave the muzzle of your gun. This is reasonably tight though. You often see 0.6 for cannons. Overheat times are quite generous, 8 seconds. Moving on to survivability, I did say at the start of this video that I tend to fly this aircraft in the heavy fighter space, and you've got a little bit of ruggedness for a fighter in order to cope with dueling with those aircraft. 13, best in class rating, 500 hit points is also best in class. The other 2 figures though aren't, and you need to watch this fire resistance figure. It's okay at 50, but if you're going to mount an uprated engine, you're going to have to start thinking about taking countermeasures such as a fire extinguisher or perhaps skills to reduce the impact of fire or how quickly you can put it out. And as you can see, quite a few of the other aircraft have got a rating of 60, which gives you a little bit more wiggle room with your choices for consumables and skills, and indeed equipment. Airspeed, 64, it's actually 3rd best in class. The Horton is a bit faster, 1st best in class. Got a couple of 66s here on 2 jets, but 64 is quite nippy, and I want to draw your attention particularly to the cruise speed here. 342 is equal best in class, which means that, having just mentioned an uprated engine, you may have the room now to consider a different piece of equipment because the aircraft is already going to cruise at a pretty fast lick. say the same for the maximum boost speed, unfortunately. This is a little bit low, and this would tend to suggest to me, especially as I think this is shaping up as a high energy fighter, that you want to put on a high speed gas turbine in order to improve your speed under boost. The boost length itself, though, is best in class, 15 seconds. That's multi-roll level, so that's great. Dive speed, pretty ordinary, 559, perfectly decent, but you're not going to use diving to get away from other fighter aircraft. Manoeuvrability, average to mediocre is how I would describe this. You don't want to get into turn fights. I'd be even careful about turn fighting with the Horton 229, which in theory is a lot less manoeuvrable, but sometimes you come across players who put on surprise manoeuvrability builds, and that will catch you out. Most people will not let you turn fight against the J8M either, so you can ignore that one. And then the rest of the aircraft are, if they're not similar in their turning capability, certainly the high energy fighters are, then they're simply going to do you for turn manoeuvrability. As you can see, as we start getting over here to the P51H, the ME209A, the Vampire, and then into even higher figures for the two LAs, the LA9, LA11, and finally the true turn fighters at the end of this comparison, Spitfire 14, Key 94-2, and the Yak-15. So in almost every occasion, you want to come in fast, hit as hard as you can with that weaponry, and speed away. We seem to have lost the legend here, but for the altitude, and we'll just put it back in, altitude performance, there we go. It's a decent rating of 63, but it's nowhere near best in class. There is a standout aircraft here. The J8M has nearly orbital levels of altitude performance, as you can see. That's an outlier. And then the next best is the Horton 229 and the TA152. As for the rest of the aircraft, they're either going to be up there with you or thereabouts if they're high energy fighters. As you can see, I'm on the P51H and the ME209 here, both of which have better altitude performance. And then it's the altitude fighters, which you can probably get above for the most part, but be careful of that Key 94-2, which has a spectacular altitude performance for what is, in theory, a turn fighter. Climb rate is 484. This is, again, okay, but it's nowhere near best in class. J8M, again, is an outlier here, 612, but you've got the Chinese aircraft will do 525. And 533 for the Vampire, so climb rate is not necessarily your friend either. You're going to want to do as much as you can with that, which you probably can do, or well, you can definitely do something about it with the high-speed gas turbine and get that up. But beware, climbing away from other aircraft may not save you either. This is one where you are going to have to pick your fights carefully, be in the right spaces at all times, and try and keep the aircraft as fast as possible. I think the power to weight ratios here are a bit misleading. I suspect these are figures only for the piston engine component of this multi-powered aircraft, mixed power plant, and I don't think there's any account taken for the turbojet. Certainly I couldn't find any figures for it, so I've got no thrust to weight figure. So it's a little bit hard to judge how fast this aircraft accelerates, but in any case I would try not to slow it down too often in a battle. We just dropped down into the worst in class figures. Well, power to weight I've already mentioned. I think that's misleading. You can see that the manoeuvrability here, that's a really bad turn time. Not many aircraft will turn less slowly than this one, and that survivability figure is a little bit low as well. So it positions this aircraft, I think, as a high-speed aircraft without a particularly standout advantage to exploit. I don't think the survivability is going to really help you, although it's nice to have. And that means that this is really an aircraft for, I think, for experienced players rather than newer players of the game. So bear that in mind. Fly it as a high energy fighter, try and keep it fast, generally keep it high, and try not to dogfight. Right, let's go and see how I've set this aircraft up and some alternatives that you might consider. Here we are with the XF15C again, and this camouflage appears in bundles occasionally. It gives you 5% aircraft experience. Now, my instance of this aircraft is specialised. That means I have all of the equipment and consumable slots available to me. However, when you first get it, it's a premium aircraft, so you're not going to be too badly hampered. Let's have a quick look. And of 5 equipment slots, you'll see that one is missing off the forward firing weapon. Could be worse. and 1 consumable out of 5 is missing off, and that's off the engine. Again, that could be worse. Just pop that back into specialist configuration, and let's go and see how we flew this aircraft in the forthcoming battle. And then what we've got is the gun sight. No surprises there, improving the accuracy. I don't think cockpit armor is going to do a great deal of good on this aircraft. And then we've got a blended speed stroke manoeuvrability build. And we've got the polished skin on the airframe to increase the cruise speed and acceleration whilst diving. And if we look at the bonus characteristics, I've increased the acceleration whilst diving twice. Good tactic on this. Pick on unwary opponents and dive on them. Also gone for manoeuvrability in turns. Maximum speed with boost activated. Actually, I would prefer, and if I was reassembling this, I would certainly drop at least 1 characteristic and pick off that bottom characteristic there. We didn't look at the ones on the gun sight here. Pilot's resistance to injuries. I would always like that. Accuracy when firing at moving targets. That increases, at least in my belief, is that increases the distance by which you can be off target, and the game will still allow you to hit your target, so that's useful to have. Accuracy of forward firing offensive armament. Bear that in mind depending on your other equipment choices, particularly on the forward firing weapon slot. It might be better to have that particular bonus characteristic. We'll talk about the lightweight power unit in a moment, but I did mention that this aircraft is somewhat lacking in terms of its maximum boost speed. And I think it's almost mandatory to put on the high-speed gas turbine here to improve the acceleration with boost, but particularly the maximum speed with boost activated. We'll look at the effects in a moment. As far as the bonus characteristics are concerned, engine cooldown rate 5%. I think there's a 10% one, so we could get rid of that one straight away and put on the 10% one, if not indeed have both of them. I've gone for 1% more maximum speed with boost and another 0.5% of maximum speed with boost. I think for this particular aircraft those are the right choices. We just need to get rid of that 5% engine cooldown rate and change it to the 10% engine cooldown rate there, I think. Lightweight power unit, a little bit more manoeuvrability, not for dogfighting, I stress, again, not for dogfighting, but to give you a little bit more time on target before you have to break off and fly straight off, before either returning after good separation to attack the same target again, or indeed just going off and doing something else. If we look at the bonus characteristics for this one, we've improved the cruise speed, the acceleration with boost, and yaw manoeuvrability. Is there anything else I'd like to pick there? More cruise speed potentially, maybe the engine's resistance to critical damage. That might be a useful one as well there. And the forward firing weapon. And I think there are 2-3 choices here. I went with reinforced bolt carriers here to increase the burst length, which is nice. You've already got a long burst length. It would be nice to actually have a longer one. You can get this up to around about 9.2 seconds from memory. We'll see a bit later. You can cool the aircraft guns down with that bonus characteristic I've got there. You can also improve the rate of fire, which gives you a little bit more DPS. And again, I've chosen to cool down the other cooldown bonus characteristic there. There's another 2% rate of fire, which I would probably pick off if I was using this equipment and reassembling it right now. Or you might increase the burst length. After all, that's why you've mounted this equipment in the first place. Or if you're concerned about accuracy, then pick off the accuracy. These are pretty much good bonus characteristics. The ones I would go for, I'd pick off the 2 rate of fires and the 10% cooldown rate if I was reassembling this equipment. Now, alternatives. Well, let's go for long gun barrels first. I probably wouldn't mount these on this particular aircraft. The range is pretty decent at 2,500 feet or thereabouts, but if you do mount the long gun barrels, you're going to get something like 2,800 and above feet range, and if you're really good at sharp shooting, then maybe this is the piece of kit for you. It's definitely not for me. But what I think is an interesting choice would be gas-operated action to increase that rate of fire, get that DPS up. I've already mentioned that the DPS is a little bit lackluster on this aircraft. With the right kind of configuration, you could probably get it up to around about 520 and hit it quite a bit harder. And if I were assembling this aircraft today, I probably would keep these pieces of equipment. I probably wouldn't put on the uprated engine despite the impact on the speed. But I'll show you what the impact will be. But I would definitely drop the reinforced bolt carriers and I'd put on the gas-operated action just to get that DPS up. Because I haven't got the uprated engine, I can mount the first aid dressing kit fairly confidently. If I mount the uprated engine, I think you've got to consider putting on a fire extinguisher. And if you don't put on a fire extinguisher, bearing in mind this is a crew trainer, you're probably going to have to pick off a pilot that has at least one, if not both of these skills here, the fire resistance or the firefighter, because this survivability figure here, this 50, will come down to about 34. And that is not good. After that, pneumatic control assist to help you with dogfighting normally. I think actually, if you go for an uprated engine, I'd be very tempted to fit this exhaust bleed inerting system. After that, it becomes a little bit much of a muchness as to whether you put on the pneumatic control assist or the emergency control system. In fact, I actually would probably put on this exhaust bleed inerting system anyway. Engine cooling, if you've got any boost at all, this gives you another 10 seconds on top. It's one of the aircraft's good characteristics, so why not improve it even further? Bear in mind, if you've got no boost, this will have no effect, so don't activate it when you have no boost. And then this aircraft really mustn't lose its engines, so I've put on a restart bottle. I don't think it's worth the risk of going for the improved mixture control just to give you more speed, although it will give you more speed. I think you need your engines in place. And finally, as usual, I've got universal ammunition selected. Okay, so that's dealt with equipment and consumables. Let's have a look at pilot skills. As a premium aircraft, I expect you'll be using this for crew training, and therefore you probably won't build a pilot specifically for this aircraft, but let's, for the sake of argument, assume that you are. And I would, because we have most of your slots available as soon as you get this aircraft, and probably will put on, I think, speed equipment, and maybe a lightweight power unit. The first skill to go for would be Aerodynamics Expert, and then I'd prioritise getting Engine Guru 1 and Engine Guru 2 to increase the speed of this aircraft, but that will probably mean getting Engine Guru 1 and then Marksman 1, then working your way up to Engine Guru 2. Maybe not Marksman 2 next, although that wouldn't be a bad skill to have. I would probably divert my attention first to cruise flight and then to resilience, and eventually I'd like to end up with both cruise flight and resilience on this. Now, this pilot belongs to my F-86 Sabre, the Tier 10 American fighter, so the build is a little bit different. Pilot skills, the mix of pilot skills is a bit different, and I have gone for an Aerobatics Expert. I don't think that's particularly necessary for the XF15C if you decide to build a pilot specifically for it. Okay. Now, before we move on to having a look at post-build effects, I just want to draw your attention to something to do with paint. I've already talked about this camouflage that you can see, but there is another special camouflage that occasionally is available, and it's actually the one I prefer to use. This one gives you 3% cruise speed, it's paint stripped off, less weight, presumably more aerodynamic, and that's worth having on an aircraft where speed is a priority. Right, let's go and look at post-build effects. Here we have a spreadsheet showing in column C and D here the base characteristics of the X15C. You've already seen these, we discussed those a little bit earlier. And then we have in columns E and F, I and J and M and N, three slightly different builds, and we have an assessment of their effects in the pair of columns that follow each of those builds. So the first one is gun sight, polished skin, lightweight power unit, high-speed gas turbine and reinforced bulk carriers. This is the build that you saw in the previous section of the video a few moments ago. And as you can see, we've got a very slight increase in the DPS, 3%. I should also mention that we're using that silver camo, flame camo that I showed right at the end of the previous section on all of these builds. So those effects are included here. And on the individual guns, you can see the individual DPS figures going up and the rate of fire. This is all to do with the reinforced bulk carriers. There is an effect on the auto-aim angle. It's very slightly improved by 5%, which takes it out to 2.6. That's useful. And we've got very nearly 8% improvement in accuracy. That is that the cone in which the bullets spread out is narrowed. This is all useful to have, but principally what we see here is the overheat time has been increased to very nearly 9.3 seconds. That's 15.7. So you can keep firing for quite a bit longer. It's quite good. Nothing you can do about shell velocity here. Very slight effect on damage resistance, -1 point here. No effect on fire resistance, that's worth noting. As far as manoeuvrability is concerned, this is mostly coming from the lightweight airspeed is concerned. This is mostly coming from the high-speed gas turbine. Rating's gone up to 73, which is a healthy increase of over 14%. In theory, the cruise speed will go up to 392. It'll be shown as higher in the hangar UI because although it will say that you've got a 14.8 increase in the effects, the calculation is actually stacked, not alongside. So if you have two different things contributing to an improvement, instead of adding them together and then calculating the improvement, you tend to find that first the base figure is multiplied by the first characteristic, and then the result of that is multiplied by the next characteristic. What you get is inconsistency in the hangar UI. So I've decided just to take the advice that we've got 14.8% and increase this cruise speed by that amount up to 393. Maximum boost speed getting up to serviceable levels, 515. Now that piece of kit in equipment in the hangar is not fully calibrated. You can probably get this up to about 525, which is more than useful. But currently we've got a just under a 10% increase. The boost duration, however, has come down by 15%. We lost 2.25 seconds there. But it's already a high boost, so you can probably afford that. Nothing to be done about the dive speed. And then the effects largely from the lightweight power unit gives an over 4% improvement in turn time, but this is still not enough for dogfighting. I'm going to emphasize it yet again. Does not turn this into a raging dogfighter. And then the roll rate is slightly improved as well. As far as the altitude performance is concerned, there's an improvement of 1 point, and that is because we've now got that climb rate up to 529, and this is very useful to have. That's coming from the high-speed gas turbine. So we move on to the second build, and what we've done is we've dropped the lightweight power unit, and now we have put on an uprated engine. So the guns will be the same, so we won't discuss those any further. Must draw your attention to the fact that the survivability has gone down by 1 point, but particularly the fire resistance has dropped down to 34. And at that point, I think you're either going to have to mount a fire extinguisher or start using skill points on fire resistance or firefighter, or maybe even both. So bear that in mind. Or you just accept that you're going to burn like a Roman candle every now and then. Airspeed notched up to 75 because the uprated engine is now kicked in. In theory, if you've got a 19.4% increase, it's going to be just over 408 miles an hour. Very, very handy indeed. And indeed, even with the uprated engine in the configuration I've got, you're now up to very nearly 520. And bear in mind, there's more to come from that high-speed gas turbine. You're probably going to get up to 530. So this will become a pretty nippy aircraft. You still lose the boost duration, of course. Maximum dive speed doesn't change. Still got a little bit of effect on manoeuvrability, but now it's tiny. It's 2% on the turn time and 2% on the roll rate. So virtually no difference, really. You probably won't feel a difference. Now you've got the climb rate up to 531. Now, I should point out that all these figures for all these builds are indicative. Your equipment won't be at quite the same level. You may have picked different bonus characteristics. Your calibration level may vary from mine, and you may have different pilot skills. So you may be able to do better than what I've got here in many cases, and sometimes you'll do worse. And the final build, what have we got? And this one keeps the uprated engine. Just going to double check that. Actually, I don't think it does. I think this is actually a lightweight power unit that's on here. Yes, it is. So we're just going to change the legend up here. But what we've done is we've dropped the reinforced bolt carriers off the forward-firing weapon slot, and we've now put on the gas-operated action to see what kind of DPS we can get. And it's pretty healthy. 519 here, which is a difference of 59 or 12.8%. You can see the rate of fire and the individual DPS for the guns has gone up to suit. As far as the other effects are concerned, the accuracy, the dispersion angle has reduced even more. It's now 8.8% smaller, so it's very nearly at 0.5, when we started at 0.55, so that's very welcome. And I'll say straight away, I think if I was building this aircraft today, this gas-operated action is what I would put on. Damage resistance goes down by 1 point, but we have not affected the fire resistance. This means that the first aid dressing kit becomes viable again, and we don't have to use skill points on fire resistance for firefighter, which personally I like. avoiding. Airspeed 73, pretty similar to the first build. In fact, I think it's identical. It is. And maneuverability, again, very similar to the first build. In fact, I think it's identical. And again, similarly with altitude performance, got that 9.3 increase there to 529. So that was all about the guns. So there you go, 3 different builds. Now there are other choices. You might put on long gun barrels. I suppose you could think about putting on a lightweight wing frame if you really want more time on target, but I don't think you're ever going to get this into light fighter, turn fighter territory, not by a long chalk, so that's not something I would do. But some food for thought, some ideas there for you to consider as you work your way towards your own build. The map for the forthcoming battle is Plateau. It's the Turning Point variant, and it's a 5-sector map with the sectors laid out roughly in the shape of 5 spots of a die. And in the centre there's a garrison, which is tactically important because it provides easy access to all the other sectors. And because of the way games often go on this map, sometimes it assumes more significance than a garrison normally would. On one axis we have a pair of air bases, repair air bases. Not so useful when they're not in the centre. However, if you need to get to one or other of the command centres, it can be quite handy on this map. So obviously you can respawn there. You can get a new aircraft of the same tier, a different one, if you're destroyed, and you can get full repairs on this. And then on the other axis, we've got the strategically important command centres, which release bomber flights to flip enemy sectors to your team. How games tend to go on this map, I've noticed, is that one team holds down one side of the map and the other team holds down the other side. And often that means that the garrison, which normally wouldn't be strategically important, actually becomes quite an important tipping point. And whoever manages to hold that for longer is able to put pressure on the enemy's 2 sectors here. So the way to win this is try and make sure you lock down one side, try and hold the garrison, and then get after the sectors that the enemy hold. We look at the order of battle. Well, straight away I can see it's quite favourable. I'm top tier in a tier 8 aircraft, the XF15C of course. I have a bomber, useful at command centres, the Junkers 288A, and the enemy team only have a pair of tier 7s, but they're pretty decent tier 7s if they're well flown. A P-51D could give me a lot of trouble, certainly keep up with me if it gets on my tail, at least for a short while. And the P-47N, if somebody who knows what they're doing is in this aircraft, then it's a powerful ground attacking force, and it's got lots of machine guns to strip down enemy aircraft that get in front of it. So let's see how this battle went. So as we spawn into the battle, I could have gone to either the airbase or the command centre. I tend to prefer attacking the airbase with fighters. They've got a pair of air defence heavies there, whereas the command centre doesn't. I'm on that side of the combat group anyway, so at the airbase it is. So I'm immediately looking for the heavies and gaining altitude. And there's the first of the heavies appearing just off to the left there. The second one appears just to the right. Now, they've actually got me between them, so I'm expecting a pincer movement here. There it comes. I fly between them, having avoided them, and I turn to get on the tail of the first heavy. Now I find American 20s quite difficult, so certainly at this stage of the battle I was aiming quite carefully. That's the first heavy down. Normally I'd hunt the second heavy here, which is actually above me, but some of the air defence fighters are close to me, so I decided to take the opportunity to shoot them. I've been set on fire here. That's probably the second heavy that's got on my tail, but I know this is a repair air base. If I kill this aircraft, we'll probably flip the base. I can pick up repairs and no harm done, and that's exactly what happened. We fly over the maintenance shed, pick up repairs. I can see that the enemy hasn't got anywhere near taking its command centre, so it's worth me going there to try and stop them from doing so, and perhaps even seize it for my team. So there's an F2G I've seen, there's clearly a bomber there as well. There'll be other aircraft there as well. In fact, I can see a third one appearing now, a fighter. Or a heavy fighter, not quite sure which, from that contrail, or exhaust trail, that's definitely a heavy, ME-262 I would guess. Put some shots into the F2G, do not turn with it, that would be a good way to lose my aircraft, so I fly away from it. The air defence aircraft that's pursuing the heavy is in a convenient location for me to shoot. Now the heavy turned for me, but obviously couldn't make the turn. And indeed was after the bomber anyway. So I put some shots into that. I need to discourage this F2G just down below me, because it will fire at me, and did. Damage its wing. Now I'm going to pursue the heavy again. Hoping to shoot its engine, but then I noticed even though there's an awful lot of exhaust, there isn't actually much acceleration from boost there, so that becomes a victim. The F2G is shot down by a multi-roll. Multi-roll is now being attacked by the air defence aircraft, so I decide to help that. Down goes the air defence aircraft. Now we're looking for other targets, and below me I can see on the map there's an ground attacker. I'll try and get into position so I can swoop down on it from behind. Completely fail, go at it from the front, but it's on such low health that I'm able to kill it, and that secures the sector. So far so good. We have one side of the map. However, the enemy, rather inconveniently, have actually taken the middle garrison. And my poor old bomber has been struggling mightily to take our local command centre. He has actually turned the situation around earlier. It was a little bit red, I noticed. F2G turns for the heavy, which is convenient because that's right in front of my guns. And I can have the manoeuvrability to be able to stick with him. He's on fire. He'll probably blow up. I don't need to chase him, really. And he does. The enemy possessing the centre allows an interesting development on this map. Meanwhile, my attention is on the ME-262 again. Again, I'm hoping to hit his engine. And again, he doesn't really boost away, which is interesting. Tail goes out. Engine goes out. Turns into a much easier kill than I expected. Down it goes. I noticed the ground attacker had come in whilst I was shooting at the ME-262. This time I do size it up properly, get behind it, swoop down on it. Now, possession of the centre has allowed the enemy to take both air bases. They've got one axis, so this is slightly unusual. We now do have both command centres though. The bombers finally managed to take our local one. So I am intent on defending this one for the moment, in the hope that the combined bomber flights will flip a sector to us. So we have incoming threats from the airfield, air base. And that's the P-51D, who didn't seem to notice that I was below him, and thus takes an awful lot of damage from me. And somewhat to my surprise, I'm able to outturn him as well. That allows me now to concentrate on the other two threats. Let's get rid of the J7W1 first. Huge guns on that. If I get in front of that, I will know everything about it. The P-47N is flying away. I fly away from the J7W1, which isn't particularly quick. P-47 is an easy kill, but I don't want it to come back and strafe me whilst I'm trying to deal with the J7W1. Turn back, and the air defence aircraft finish off the J7W1. Now, there are more threats coming into the command centre, but we're 3 sectors to 2 down. We haven't got map control. I think it's time to do something about it. So I'm off to try and take the middle and therefore give my bomber easy transit all over the map. At the moment we only need one more aircraft, so I'm sizing up this fighter, and then the heavies fly straight over the top of me and I realise they're easier targets. Very nearly got this heavy down, but they managed to kill the bomber, which means I now need both heavies. Well, that's easy enough. I've got the first one down, the second one will follow shortly. And in fact we take the sector before I shoot down that heavy. However, it does register as a kill, which is important, as you'll see later. So now we should have easy transit, but we're going to lose the command centre almost for certain. I'm going to follow the bomber flight into the airfield and see if I can get that airfield and restore our 3-2 advantage in terms of sectors. Get the heavy. Bombers are doing their stuff. They get enough targets, 2 of them, we should have the airfield. And that's exactly what happens. All the threats have been cleared out of this airfield. I don't need to stay here. I don't need repairs. So I'm off to the command centre to see if I can get hold of it again. Notice the ground attacker. But then I realise there's something above me. That's much more important to me, much more of a threat. It's the P-47N. Healthy damage on that as it approached. I can outturn the P-47N. And he's leading me into the command centre. That's convenient, so now I'm going to take on the air defence aircraft. A few shots into the first one. Don't turn with them, fly away. They don't really put in much of a pursuit, so I get about 3,500 feet away, 4,000 feet away. Then I come back for another pass. Shoot at the first one. Get some healthy damage into that, and fire to boot. The other 2 have separated from him, so I chase after those. Weave to avoid the anti-aircraft fire. That's another air defence aircraft very severely damaged. The third one is shot down. Akamatsu medal goes through. 400 points in a single sortie. Finish off another of the air defence aircraft. Don't quite finish off the last one. Now, I assume he's going to fly straight on because he's heavily damaged, so I turn this time. Could be wrong about that, but yes, the turn is very slow. I shoot it down, and now we've got the command centre, and now we've begun to establish control of this map and this battle. And that illustrates that that central location is quite important. It allows your team to fly across the map at will. If you haven't got that, it becomes tricky and dangerous. The F7F flies across me, shoot out its engine. The F7F is perfect fodder for this aircraft anyway, and without an engine it's just basically a sitting duck, although it does cause me a little bit of hassle because it's flying so slowly. And now, having got control of the battle, we're looking for targets of opportunity. There's 2 aircraft at the airbase. The airbase is not really under threat, certainly not if I get there. One of them dies anyway, that just leaves the one to address. Not sure I'm going to get it, but then it turns out that it's pursuing an air defence aircraft. Nothing is threatening it, so this should be a kill for me. It turns out to be the J7W1. It is an easy kill, and that's the ace. Now the enemy only has 1 aircraft left. It's nowhere near me. There's no other threats near me because we own the 3 sectors of this map. We have now devolved into the classic situation of owning one side of the map in the centre. So everything's worked out as I anticipated in the end, although how we got there was a little bit unusual. And it's 16,500 personal points and a nice clutch of medals. Decent battle. Let's review the outcome of the battle, but I just want to draw your attention. All of these figures are inflated by missions and a special ×5 weekend bonus. Don't expect to get these in the normal course of events. That said, it's a 4 chevron battle, or a grade 2 fighter, which grossed 439,261 credits, or silver if you prefer. 110,000 of that came from a premium account bonus, and then you can see other bonuses also totaling 110,000 kicked in, which you wouldn't normally have. 22,436 aircraft experience, most of which came from those extras that I talked about. As you can see, the breakdown is there. 3,590 base experience and a premium account bonus, and then you see 17,000 which came from the extras. For experience, mostly coming from the ×5 here, 1,032 with a small premium account bonus of 89. 2 tokens, first medals of the day, a Marseille and an Ace. There they are. There's also an Akamatsu medal, and there's also a Winged Legend. We turn to the personal score tab. We can see that 2 of the 3 class-specific missions were completed. Surprisingly, in my view, didn't do quite enough shooting down of aircraft over sectors that we owned, and that's why it's not a 5 chevron battle. I am a little bit surprised by that because I spent quite a long time over that command centre. Nevertheless, 16,550 personal points, 5 sectors captured, quite busy. 20 aerial targets destroyed, exactly the number needed for the ace. 7,182 damage to aerial targets with 24 critical hits coming off the cannons. Didn't lose the aircraft. 540 capture points. And maybe that's the explanation. I've obviously spent less time defending than I thought. Only 120 capture points there, 420 for attacking. And if we turn to the team score tab, we can see that that was enough for first place. Would have been on both teams, both by personal points and chevrons. I noticed early on that the bomber player, who has made a very poor contribution here on the face of it, actually got kicked out of the game. So he was hampered right from the very beginning. So no blame attaches to him. He definitely came back in, which was great, and he tried. And then the 2 human players on the enemy side made an effort. I shot down the P-51D once. I may very well have shot down the P-47N once as well. Certainly shot down a couple of bots if I didn't shoot down this one. Decent efforts here. I'm very pleased that we won this battle, particularly as the bomber wasn't in it for the first few minutes. That brings me to the end of my look at the Curtiss X15C, and this is a high-energy fighter with decent characteristics across the board, but nothing's particularly spectacular, and therefore I think it's one more for experienced players than newer players of the game. Keep it fast, keep it high, stay off the flaps as much as you can, choose your moments carefully to dive on unsuspecting opponents, but make sure you've looked at the main map to make sure you're not going to feed yourself to a bunch of enemy aircraft, and you may very well find that you have some decent games in this plane. If you found that helpful, and you haven't yet subscribed, then take a moment to consider that. It is free and I'd appreciate the support. And with that, until the next time, this is the Noble Q signing out.